Welcome to this very special edition of the Metal Exchange. This is Chris here. Unfortunately, Justin won't be able to join us. This is kind of a last-minute thing, but it was something that we could not say no to. And we have on the line Gary Wehrkamp from Shadow Gallery, who reached out to us and offered to share a few words about the band. Gary, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Hey, Chris. Great to talk to you today. I'm glad to be discussing anything music with you.
That's very cool. We released a podcast Monday morning talking about pretty much the history of the band, starting from, the early 80s when they started as Sorcerer and all the way on through releasing Digital Ghosts and some of the live concerts that followed. You joined the band after the self-titled album. How did you get in touch with the guys from the band? How did the whole process of you joining the band come together?
Actually, right after they put out the first album, I had a friend of mine that I was in a band with, and he came over, and this was just when I first started playing piano. So I might have been 19 or 20, or I'm not exactly sure, but they were working on that first album, and I don't think it was done yet. But my friend played me that stuff and said, what do you think? And I just remember thinking, oh, the keyboard player is fantastic. I think I just heard one song. And then I really heard nothing else about it. They weren't looking for anybody. And probably at about 92, I guess, I was off on a tour of the U.S. It wasn't a consistent tour. It wasn't like, your typical 6 weeks out. It was 2 weeks out, 2 weeks off, a week out, And when I got done with that, I was playing with a band called the Box Tops, which was not really a good fit for me. I got thrown into the situation and was doing it more for the experience. But it was an oldies band, and everybody in the band was much older than I was. I was just this young kid, and they were all in their 40s. And when I got done with that, I really felt that I wanted to continue touring, but with people my own age. And I started to put together a big project in my head that was going to be this over-the-top progressive rock band with big vocals and big everything. And it wasn't long after that I got a call from somebody who said, hey, there's a band looking for somebody to join who can play a guitar and keyboards and sing. And it took me about probably 3 weeks to track down through all these people, because my friend said, oh, I know a friend, he knows a friend, but he's moving, call him tonight, and he knows this guy. And I tracked this down to the night before. My friend Dave, who was like four people deep, who knew of this connection. He was like, oh, God, I'm glad you called me. I'm moving tomorrow morning. And this was obviously way before cell phones. And so I just called him, and he put me in touch with Mike Baker, the singer, and called and found out they were looking to do a tour, possibly of Japan, because that first album was released and doing well in Japan. So I basically came down for an audition, and, immediately we were joking around, and I won the audition, I guess you would say. And so I was just going to be a touring member of the band. That's it. And
it took how many years until you got to go on that tour?
Yeah, right. Like the irony of that. That's the whole reason I was doing the band. And, and I said, by the way, when's the tour? And it was, I didn't get a concise answer, but believe me, from the first album, that was the intention, totally, completely. It wasn't like anybody didn't want to do it or were afraid of doing it. And it's just probably the fact that we were all busy doing other things, and we were trying to transition as in our early mid-20s to making this a full-time job, but we all had other jobs, and I think it just kept things on a slower pace than we would like. But what ended up happening is they had already written a bunch of songs that were going to be on the Carved in Stone album, and they were in demo format, but some of these demos were fantastic sounding, even if they did change. And the record company basically said, hey, what about the next record? You're on a schedule here. And so they decided to record what would become Carved in Stone and then tour after that, immediately after that. So they called me and said, after much deliberation and a discussion with Carl and like trying to get this all in order before we got attorneys involved, we were talking about contracts, like what I would get paid for my shows in Japan and this and that. He all of a sudden called me and he said, hey, how would you like to just join the band as a full member instead of us paying you? And we're going to make a next record first. And you can, be totally involved and an absolute equal partner in all senses, from the word go. And I said, sure, as long as there's room for me to write, because writing was my big thing. And they did have a lot of it written, but they allowed me to get involved any way I could to start writing from that album. And while I didn't write as much for that album as the others, it was really nice to be involved creatively. So that was it. So we shelved the tour and started working on the record, and that was the next step.
Had you heard the original album, and if so, what were your thoughts? And did you have any ideas of what you thought you could contribute that might have been missing from that first album, besides obviously, an actual drummer?
Yeah, well, I ended up hearing, I heard the same first song, which was Dance of Fools, that my friend played me, earlier. And when I showed up for the audition, after I auditioned, I brought some material that I was writing that was progressive rock, and they played me the album. I think we skipped Dance of Fools, and they played me Darktown next, and honestly, I was absolutely floored. I mean, first of all, I felt like, oh my gosh, my fingers don't go quite that fast. It was definitely a speedy kind of shredder, but Brent Allman was just off the charts with that, and then Chris too on keyboards. I mean, I was just getting into keyboards and playing a lot, but I never heard two people play like simultaneous solos like that. This was before Dream Theater really hit, and so I never really heard any Dream Theater or any bands like this. So I've always loved prog rock, but yeah, I was completely blown away, and they gave me a cassette of most of the songs that night, and I quickly became a fan. So I became as big of a fan of the band as I was a joining member at the same time, and I just OD'd on that first album. And honestly, to tell you the truth, and I hope this doesn't come across negative, when I heard the material for Carved in Stone and started working a little bit on that, and when I say working, I mean they pretty much didn't need me. They had that so much in place. I just came in and started doing some solos and some segues and little sections here and there. But I kept saying, hey, when are we should do stuff more like that first album, because that first album's killer. And while I liked Carved in Stone a lot, I really thought there was just this magic on that first record. And so after I was able to get more involved, let's say by the fourth album, by Legacy, my goal was to kind of try to steer the band back to a little bit of that, what was going on in the earlier days. But yeah, no, I loved it, heard it, loved it, and was excited to learn it and play it, which I did immediately,
Very cool. So how was your experience as far as recording Carved in Stone? Were there any songs that were favorites of yours, whether you wrote them or not? Just talk a little bit about your feelings about Carved in Stone at the time and now all these years later.
Well, I mean, it depends on the song, but if you look at, like, let's say the first song, Cliffhanger, the whole body of that song was done, and most of the solos were already written and demoed. Actually, it was kind of funny because when it was still in the demo stages with Drum Machine and before we got to the actual recording, I did a solo or two, I think something in the middle, and then at the end of the song had this big long guitar solo, and Brent and Carl were like, hey, why don't you play half that solo? And basically Brent recorded the first 3/4 of the solo, and then they left me just the end. And when they played it for me, like, they started fading it out right away, and I was just dying laughing. I was insulted, but just in a funny way. I'm going, oh, so this is how it's going to be, right? Brent plays this solo of 1 million beautiful notes, and then I start, and as soon as I start playing something, it fades out. And so, for the real album, we did change it, and we split it, 50-50 at the end there. But so that's kind of how it got started. And my input was more in kind of bridging some gaps in Ghost Ship and filling in sections, because they had a lot of that already written, and those big long great solo sections. It's just Chris and Brent just going to town, and Carl putting it together. So I kind of came in more as a co-producer with Carl heading that job up, and just trying to assist in any way I can. And the ironic thing is I saw myself more as a guitar player and going to provide lots of backing vocals and some orchestration. And at that time, Chris Ingalls suddenly left the band for personal reasons, but it was an absolute shock and absolute surprise. And it was before we had started any actual real recording other than the demos. So we spent some time searching for a keyboard player who can play like him. And, we were tossing around names like Jens Johansson, who's the personal hero of mine from Yngwie Malmsteen. And I think at that time Kevin Moore left Dream Theater, so we were trying to get Kevin in the band and big connections with him. And so we went back and forth, and finally, there was that big piano solo and a bunch of keyboard parts. I just said, hey, I'll do it. And everybody in the band kind of looked at me like, well, we need somebody really good. And I said, no, I'll do it. I'll learn the parts. Let me have a shot. I'll be the keyboard player. And that was quite a challenge. And I just had won a piano recently in a contest, and so that became my life. Wake up every day and practice and play piano. As an unschooled, untrained player, to try to play Chris. Well, not all of Chris's parts, but a bunch of them. And he was a very schooled, trained player, where his mom was a teacher and professor of music. And, so Chris and I were from different worlds. He was very, very trained and a brilliant technical player. And I was just an improviser who didn't know what I was doing. But, joining the band really helped me escalate. And it turned me into more of an honest player.
Well, it turned out wonderfully. This was my first Shadow Gallery album. The first song I ever heard was Alaska. Actually, a friend played for me, and I just had to hear the rest of the album. Would you say that this album was Shadow Gallery's first taste of some popularity in the prog scene, or would that not follow until a little bit later on?
No, it kind of exploded, and we worked very, very hard on it, and we had lots of technical issues, which was something that would repeat throughout most of our career, because we were doing it ourselves. Carl was just a wonderful, educated recording engineer. Brent was very intuitively good at it. I had always been, even with smaller studios, my favorite thing was owning and recording all the time. So we had 3 engineers, which was a certain plus to the band, that, it wasn't just one person, but we were doing it all ourselves with almost no gear at all. So it was a real challenge to make it sound good. And you're working with one microphone and one of this, and, it was so extremely limited, but I think that served us well into learning how to carve, that's a funny word there, how to carve a unique sound, out of something, not because we were trying so much to be unique, but because we didn't have the gear to compete with what the bigger bands were doing at the time. When it came out, I just remember we did a series of interviews, and I thought it was a good record. I was proud of it. I remember the day it came out, I was out in Phoenix, and I drove to the record store, and it was the first time in my life that my own record was there on the shelves on the release day that it came out. And there was a bunch of copies. So it was exciting. I thought, this is a good piece of work. I can't wait for us to top it, because I know we can do better. But then the reviews started coming in, and it really kind of blew me away that it really struck a chord with a lot of people, and especially a lot of journalists that were, kind of hailing it as a really monumental new record by a new band. And, they believed in it more than I did. I thought, this is good, but, just wait, give us 5 years. But yeah, no, it really quickly grew. And then that changed the band. I mean, I don't want to sound crass or tell you too much, but, you're a band of brothers, and you're all in it together. And, you just take every minute you can when you're not working to do it. And then all of a sudden you start getting these royalty checks, and they change really quick, So we spent a lot of time. We had to become a business and get attorneys involved and accountants involved and decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to form a business? And that's what we did. We basically formed a business called Shadow Gallery and Room 5 Publishing. And we decided we wanted our next album to sound better than the last one. But, with Magna Carta, the budget was extremely small, pathetically small, if I may. And so we said, let's take this money and let's invest it into a better studio and better gear. And that ended up taking forever. And while that was going on, simultaneously, we started rehearsing for a tour. And we didn't have a tour manager, so I kind of said, hey, I'll do it. I'll set it up. And so I started working with companies and promoters over in Europe. And I remember I actually had an itinerary. Our first date was going to be Milan, Italy. And we were going to open up for Gamma Ray and a couple shows. And
wow.
It was far from done, but I'd done a lot of work to push us into that level where I was entertaining contracts with promoters, and we were rehearsing all the while, you know what I mean? And we got a drummer and rehearsed, and next thing you know, the Magna Carta comes back to us, and they said, this album is just exploding, and everybody's, all of our licensees are looking for for the next album. Tell us that you're well underway and you're almost done. And I was like, oh, Jesus, here we go again. We want to tour. I wanted to tour, so I joined the band. And everybody in the band was excited about that, too. And we had to have a meeting and decide. The label said, we were hoping that you have the next record finished by, and it was an unreasonably short period of time in our eyes. Probably in their eyes, they were right. But, they basically said, can you turn us in a new album? And let's say it was, hopefully you'll be done in 3 months. And, we just don't work that quickly. But we had to have a meeting and decided to shift gears. And unfortunately, I saw that as a monumental waste of a summer to put that tour together. And, and it really sucks because then after that, we went on to do Tyranny. We started to hear whispers in the community that, they're a good band, but they don't tour. They don't want to play live, or, they're not able to do it. And that really bugged me because we could. I've got tapes of us playing Ghost Ship in its entirety and all these songs. We rehearsed them. We had it set. We had all the sounds identical to the record. Everything was set to go. But it was the right decision to get on another album and then put off a tour. And then the Tyranny record was just a wonderfully awesome, disastrous time making that record. And I think when that record was done, nobody wanted to be in a band anymore.
That's fascinating to me because, at least for me, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I feel like this was probably the most well-received Shadow Gallery record of all time. Would you agree or disagree?
The Tyranny record, yeah, probably universally across the board. And what really helped us a lot, there was just certain people in the media that we had gotten to know. And, we love doing interviews. We're not this kind of band that shies away from it. I look at it as I love talking about music. Why would I pass up the chance to talk to anybody about, the music that I've worked on? It's a passion. And so I was telling our publicist, Colin, saying, hey, I'll set up any and every interview you can. And boy, it was all of a sudden, here's 80 interviews and they're back to back. And it was great. The only thing that gets weird about that, since I'm kind of off topic here, is when you get asked the same exact questions, 8 times in a day, because they typically start at 10:30 in the morning, and then you have one at 11:30, then a break. And by the time it's 3 o'clock, somebody's saying, what was the inspiration behind the album? And you just answered that exact question. It's
right.
Just it's a different accent. It's a Greek accent this time instead of a German accent. But there were people like Sakis Fragos. I remember he was a Greek journalist, and he really took a liking to the record and to us, and with the interviews. And they did the top 100 albums of the year. And there was some bigger bands on there too, like Megadeth and Bon Jovi, and bands that were selling quite a bit, but they voted us number one, and that really changed things for us in Greece. And all of a sudden we became, I'm not going to say a household name, but, in the prog rock world, we were certainly a name worth mentioning a lot in Greece. And that changed things a lot for us, which was fantastic. And to this day, I got more Greek friends than, I can count, which is a great thing.
That's really
but,
cool.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, yeah, Tyranny was probably definitely, to get to the meat of your question, it was probably the most universally accepted album of the bunch, yeah.
Yeah, this album came out when me and my friends were in high school on Long Island, and this was a really big deal for us because we had just started listening to metal, and we knew Carved in Stone, but we had a friend who said, you have to hear this Tyranny album. And so I went to the Roosevelt Field Mall, and I told the story on the podcast that, my aunt took me Christmas shopping, and I said, you have to, everyone keeps telling me about the CD, I got to get it. And so I got it on Christmas Day, ironically enough. And
oh, wow. How awesome is that?
Yeah. And I would just pass it along to my friends, you guys have to listen to this. And it just blew up, and we still talk about it to this day. It's just because of that time period. It's our favorite album because, it was, at the time we were probably aware of maybe 20, 25 metal albums. So, this was kind of a huge deal. Did you know at the time that this was only going to be half the story, or did that kind of come about later on?
No, that came out later on. We knew the story wasn't concluded, and I think we didn't discuss it too much, but I think there probably may have been mild talk about, hey, we have the opportunity in the future if we want to conclude the story. And even when we did move on to the next album, I was writing some pieces that I thought could be a continuation of both the cliffhanger story, which also, leaves you hanging. And so I was writing music that could be possibly cliffhanger part 2. Oh, wait a minute. No, actually, no, we ended up putting that out. What am I saying? And then also stuff that could be a continuation. And when I think we did get to the Room 5 album, I know I'm jumping ahead of your record, but my goal was I said, hey, we should do a 3-song piece that, continues the Tyranny story, and we can either conclude it or just have more. But wouldn't it be cool to just stick right in the middle of this next record, another chapter there? And then we started to run with it. Carl started to run with a lot of themes and ideas, and, came up with this brilliant story that was every bit as deep as the Tyranny story, and so it ended up becoming the whole record. But no, we didn't know that when we were doing Tyranny, that we were going to do a whole nother record.
We were trying to figure out when we were speaking who Laura Jaeger is and where you found her, because her vocals on the 2 songs on the 2 albums are just wonderful. Was she a friend? How did you get connected with her?
She was a super dear close friend of mine that I met when I worked at a music store. Her and her husband Tom were these just brilliant musicians, and we formed together a progressive rock band, and that was the last progressive rock band I was in before I joined Shadow Gallery. So, I think Shadow Gallery was achieving a lot of what our band Avant Garde was trying to achieve, but didn't quite get the enough opportunity to do that. But we thought our band was going to take over the world. It's that confidence / arrogance you have when you're young and you're onto something and you really have a chemistry with people in the band. But I really, really did love that band, and it still remains to this day one of my favorite bands I've ever been in. And I'm not in touch with them as much these days as I was, other than maybe liking something that their daughter posts on Facebook. But no, she was a very close friend of mine, and when I joined Shadow Gallery, I think it was a bittersweet happiness, but what we had done together was fantastic. So I got them involved in when we did Pink Floyd's song Time. I said, oh, this is great. I need some female backup vocals. And I had both Tom, who's got a great high range, and Laura come in and do that. And when we needed somebody for that first song on Tyranny, we were tossing around names, and I suggested Laura, and we went with her, which was great. The only issue maybe being is that Carl had written something that was a very low register, and that's just not where she soars. If you think she sounds good there, you should hear her kind of really belt stuff out. She's got all the emotion and sings like Ann Wilson, and she's fantastic. So, I'm not complaining about it, but unfortunately we didn't. I don't feel like we gave her a chance to showcase. It's like if Dream Theater asked me to play on their record and said, just use one finger and play on one string, all the low notes, instead of, it would be like, well, it's great, but I could do more, so that's what I felt about her. But yeah, she was a great addition to both records.
Well, I definitely thought that she was worth mentioning, and we were trying to rack our brains and see if we could find some more stuff with her, and we weren't able to, so I thought I would definitely want to ask you about that. So you mentioned that you guys weren't sure you wanted to continue after recording this album. Is that something that you want to talk about, or do you want to move on to legacy, or just kind of expound on that if you don't mind?
I'll briefly discuss it. It wasn't a decision that we sat down and made. We didn't say, oh, well, I don't want to do this anymore. But, there was just periods in our studio that we thought it was haunted. We didn't know. And I'm saying this tongue-in-cheek, half-jokingly. But I think Carl even brought a priest in to check out, because everything was going wrong, like every day. One of the members, took the tapes and put them in one spot, and they forgot to put them back in the case. This was back in ADAT days of recording on these VHS tapes. And that was all of a sudden the studio would spring a leak in the roof overnight, and it would rainstorm, and it would rain and ruin the master tapes. And so we just had a never-ending series of this, and transitioning into Pro Tools and computer recording. It was great. Technology was great, but it was really giving us a hard time. And, after just dealing with things, I remember recording all my guitars for I Believe, which was a long song, monumental one. And although I had done it for the demo, you're really trying to be precise with the drums, and, you're meticulous about it. So it was like 8 hours doing that song. And next day I came in and I hit play on the computer, and it would only loop the first, I think 3 seconds, and all the rest of the data was missing. And so we had a never-ending series of that. And I just think we needed a mental break from all the technical issues. And so nobody said, hey, we're done, we're not doing it. Just simply put, nobody talked about a tour. I mean, for all the talk about tours, this was the first time and the only time we did not in any way even think about going out and playing these songs. Not because we couldn't, but I think we needed a break from them. And then what happens is you get back invested into your lives, and we sacrificed, as all bands do, we sacrificed a lot of time not seeing our all of a sudden, Carl, we're starting to have kids, and between that and your other jobs, you're not getting to see your kids or see your family, and that starts taking a strain on that. And so I think everybody just said, let somebody else figure this out. I'm going to go back to whatever I'm doing. And honestly, the most ambitious person during that time period was Mike Baker. He was like gearing to go, and because he sings his parts, and then we go through all the mixing and the all the other stuff. So Mike and I, that's what led us to Legacy, which was early on more of a Mike Baker project than anything, and I was just trying to feed him with a lot of music that he could write to, and I thought this was a good time for him to come forward. Especially, I'm sure he felt a little bit slighted that Carl had all these great lyrical ideas that went with a storyline, and while we did present opportunities for all of us to be involved in that, and we were, but Carl was the brilliant mind behind that story. So Mike was kind of sidelined to just write the bridge to this part, or just write this part, and same with all of us. And I'm kind of off on a tangent here about the topic, but to be fair, we did sit down and have meetings, and where we were able to all interject into what I would call Carl's storyline, different parts. Like I would say, hey, it'd be cool if the dad died, and like, okay, let's put that in I Believe. And somebody else would say, hey, it would be good if he gets to see the victims all around him, someplace, and that became the song Victims. And so Mike had his say, but I think Mike saw this as his big opportunity to jump forward and kind of say, oh, everybody's not writing, this is my chance. So that's what led to Legacy.
Was it daunting to have to follow up an album that was so widely, well received, or were you ready to just kind of move on and do your next, put out your next album and just keep the train rolling, if you will?
Yeah, no, nobody was ready, like I said, other than Mike. And Mike kept asking Brent and Carl and myself, I think, or Chris and myself for ideas. I think Chris he came back for a bit, but he disappeared again. And so Chris was kind of out of the equation. And Brent, I think, I may be exaggerating, but I don't think he even touched or looked at a guitar for over a year. He just,
wow.
Which is very odd for somebody like him, that it was so much a part of his life since he was like probably 14, 15, But all of a sudden, 10, 12 years later, and you start saying, why am I doing this? Am I doing this so I can deal with all these technical issues? And, so we knew Tyranny was a good piece of work. We didn't realize how good. I didn't. And, I thought, well, this is better than Carved in Stone. And so we did up it and put a lot of time in, but it was more marred by the issues. But with Mike, the only downfall was he was didn't have the experience as a lyric writer that Carl did. And he wrote very different melodically. So what a lot of the ideas that he and I were starting, to me, didn't really sound like Shadow Gallery. And without Brent and Chris's input early on, I was forced to have to make the decision to constantly say, well, Mike, this is a good idea, but it's not going to be on our next record. Let's try something else. And Mike and I tried a lot of different songs, and I wanted to just let him write the melodies, but he had come up with a lot of great stuff, a lot of great material, but it was never great full songs. And, equal on par with that, maybe I wasn't giving him, solid 6-minute, beautiful, wonderfully emotionally moving music. I made him write just a great chorus or a great solo. So what we ended up doing is I said, look, we got a lot of good ideas here, but I don't think any of them are good enough to be on the next Shadow Gallery album. And I think I even sent it to the other guys in the band, and no one really even got back to me or had an opinion. It was like we became ghosts to each other and got back in each other's our own individual lives and jobs and families. So I said to Mike, let's just take the best parts of these, let's say 10, 12 songs, and I'm going to piece them together and write some segues, and you and I can then write a storyline that makes sense. We'll keep some of your melodies, but we'll change it. And that became the song First Light. So, First Light was never supposed to be a big, long song. It was really just, I don't want to say use the word failed, but it was a collection of various ideas that on their own couldn't stand up. But when thrown together, hey, we're in this thing called progressive rock. It leaves the ability, you can really do whatever you want, Who says you can't have a 20-minute song with 30 sections? Who says? It's art. So that worked to our advantage.
That's funny because that kind of parallels what we talked about on the podcast regarding First Light, how it really feels like this journey that you get taken on, and it's cool to kind of hear a little bit more of how it was constructed. We also talked about how we felt like this was up until that point, like it was Shadow Gallery's best sounding album, sonically or production wise. It just sounded really clean.
We did upgrade if you want me to comment on that, we did upgrade our equipment a bit. I think where did we do the drums for that? I think we went to a different studio. I remember we went to the Menagerie for the drums, and when it was time to record, we did have the luxury to say, we're not expert recorders. I didn't think anything we've ever done sounded amazing. Maybe other people may disagree with that, but I'm very critical of that. And I didn't think Legacy was sounding all that amazing either. But, we're recording on a $2,000 Mackie mixing board with a bunch of ADATs and a couple tracks of Pro Tools. But we did have the chance to go and mix that at a better studio. We didn't mix it ourselves. I flew out to Chicago and worked with Neil Turnin, who's got a resume, 10 miles long. And, we mixed it on an SSL board. And so it was the first time we actually were working on, at least at the mix stage, something a little bit better that we could try to liven up our tracks that we recorded ourselves. So
it was noticeable, I thought.
Yeah, Carved in Stone is hard to, you can't judge the first album. It's a drum machine. It was recorded like on a 4-track or an 8-track cassette. It was pretty much a demo, most of it. And the label said, we know it's a demo, but it sounds that it's such good material. We just want to release that, And I think Carl put it, when I talked to him about that way back in the day, and he had two thoughts, and one was, oh no, and the other one was, thank God. We didn't really want to have to redo all those songs on that first demo, but the demo became the album. The second album, like I said, we didn't have any gear, so it was one microphone, one reverb, one small mixing board. Tyranny, we had more gear, but it was marred with problems. So Legacy was still limited gear, but at least we got to mix it on something better and, put some more punch into the kick drum and bass guitar. And, so it was nice to see that evolution, but, it obviously all of a sudden it cost a lot more money to get in there and mix it.
Sure. Did you feel that when it came time to do Room 5 that everybody was kind of back on the same page again and kind of ready to get back together with all the heads together again instead of just a couple of people excited and maybe a couple of people not so into it? How did this album come about?
Well, it was delayed a bit because we finished the Legacy the record, and like I said, I remember even calling Magna Carta at one point and saying, hey, I don't think we're going to make this fourth record. We don't have material, no one's into it. And they very, in a business-like manner, begged me to do it. They said, Gary, I get it, it's been tough, but you do have this option. We've exercised the option, so you do kind of have to make it. Can you please make this record? And then you can go from there and do what you want. We can discuss it, but please just make this record. And so, they kind of went a long way. Maybe they knew I had a soft spot, but I was like, all right, we got to make this record. With Room 5, we were able to start moving forward, and, we got a new contract from Magna Carta, but then we all of a sudden started getting contract offers from everybody. Tyranny was selling, for a progressive rock band, it was selling pretty well, not the numbers of a band like Yes or Rush or anywhere near that, but for a small band. And I didn't even know this, I saw our sales climbing, and I talked to a few of the labels, and there's a bunch of smaller labels too. And, I was discussing with them the numbers that we were doing. And, again, they weren't huge, but certainly in the dozens of, the tens of thousands. And they were like, well, God, a lot of our bands are selling like 2,000 or 2,500. So I realized that we had a little more worth. And so I went to a big New York City attorney to help with some new contracts. And, they basically told me, yeah, boy, I'm giving you a lot of information. I don't usually tell anybody, but they basically told me, yeah, we can do this contract. It'll be 10, 12,000, whatever. And I thought, oh gosh, that's such a big portion of our budget. That's like ridiculous. So I left and I decided I was going to, just like I did with the keyboards. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. I'll be the attorney. And I just started studying attorney contracts. And, my dad was very legal based. So I just started studying all different kinds of contracts. So I ended up doing the contract for the Inside Out label. And I was very, very, I knew that we had some value then, so I wasn't willing to just take their contract and sign it and say, good. No, I went over every word, every point, changed everything I wanted. And I think the contract for that, instead of it taking 2 weeks, it took 13 months. We actually had the record done before we had the contract signed. But it did delay things a bit. There's that word again. But no, we got a lot more on board. And what my biggest favorite thing about Room 5 was Brent and I writing so much of that together, like at the same time. And, Carl and Mike kind of were back reserved to, okay, when you guys have music, send to us and we'll write, some melodies for it. But at the same time, Brent's a brilliant melodic writer and a great lyricist, and I've always done that too. But when you're in a band where everybody does everything, you kind of have to leave room for somebody else. Brent could easily have done the whole record by himself, or I could have, or Carl could have, But so you kind of leave these gaps. So we work in these pockets of time of, okay, let's put together some music, let's put together some emotion, let's describe what we feel the emotion of this song is, and make suggestions, and then let's let Carl start working his magic, and Mike, start singing some demos. But it was really great because at Legacy, I felt like I wrote a lot of that music by myself and sent it out. Notwithstanding, I think the song Society of the Mind, I just begged Brent and Chris. Chris came back in the picture all of a sudden real quickly. I just said, can you guys please just write one song without me? I want nothing to do with it. Just write one song. And, while I was involved with everything with the recording of that song, I didn't write it, and that was great. But with Room 5, Brent and I were hanging out, going out for beers at night and like working during the day. And, I just remember he and I together saying, hey, this is cool. And like everything we started doing, it was the first time he and I gelled in the same room at the same time and put stuff together. And it was just fantastic to do it that way. So yeah, everybody kind of got more involved. Chris, he kind of has the same story. I don't know where he was at, where he was living. He came back to do keyboards on, one or two songs, but just small portions. But yeah, there was a sense of unity again. Yeah, so I guess that's how I would answer your question. The sense of unity was coming back in a different way.
Okay. If it's okay with you, I just want to talk briefly about Digital Ghosts and a little bit about touring, and then I can let you go if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Actually, I know we're going later than I said, but I just wrote a note. I pushed something back so I can talk some more a little longer. Sure.
Very good.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to keep you.
Thank you.
So, in between Room 5 and Digital Ghosts, unfortunately, Mike passes away, and I was curious, had you already started working on the album with Mike prior to him passing away, or did this come out completely after he died?
No, Mike was around for it, and we were talking about doing shows, and even if it wasn't a full tour, we were talking about even Mike and myself and Brent possibly going and doing, an acoustic show, a night with Shadow Gallery. Carl was getting very busy with a lot of other projects, musical and on professional levels, working with the M. Night Shyamalan on big movies. And so he was kind of having seen his career kind of shift and move around. So, but we were talking about shows, and it was exciting. Mike was excited to do it. He had a few health issues that delayed some of those decisions, and so we said, okay, well, we can still do that, but let's start working on another record. And we did Digital Ghost, and Mike was involved. There's actually demos of him singing Gold Dust, and I forget what the other one was, but he sang two of the songs. He was so super excited by it. There was no bigger fan of that record than him, and which is kind of sad, but he was telling me all the time, hey, this is like the greatest stuff ever, and I can't wait to sing this. And he was just really, really excited by it. And we that was our second option on Inside Out, so we knew we were going to do it. There was no, no record. It was like, yeah, this is going to happen. And there's always funny stories, but like if people talk about like the knocking at the end of the Carved in Stone, or why we did it again at the end of First Light. All that stuff is sometimes just an absolute joke that we played between each other. And just to get back to that, because I've had people write to me, and I've seen like in the news forums back in the days when I used to read them, like, what I'm talking about, the end of the last song on Carved in Stone and the last song on Room 5. Is it Room 5 or Legacy? They have.
I think it's Legacy. My dogs, that's their favorite song, because when they hear the doorbell ring, they think somebody's here and they start barking.
Well, honest to God, I mean, on the Carved in Stone album, I'm always working at different styles of music, and I just composed that little piece on Thanksgiving morning, and Carl and I had a lunch break. We're at the studio producing the record, working on parts, and I played that. He's like, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's just something I did, Thanksgiving." And he's like, "No, let me hear it." So he played it, and he goes, "Oh, dude, that's got to be on the record. That's got to be on the record." I'm like, "Oh, maybe we can work that in the future, but it doesn't really fit anything on Carved in Stone." He's like, no, let's put it on there. And he goes, "Hey, you know what else? Let's not even tell anybody." So that was his idea. And then I thought, okay, and I just got creative at the end, and I said, it'd be cool if I make this song like 7 minutes and 23 seconds, which are my initials, GW. So I had to fill it in with space, and I thought, I've always wanted to have like a song end, and then nothing happened for a long time, and then something happened, and people were like, "Oh, I didn't realize the album wasn't over." So it was like 5 minutes. I said, "Hey, put this in the record," and I just went right into the vocal booth and just knocked on the door. And next thing you know, people are counting knocks, and they're going, "No, this is from the Bible. If you count, the knocks up, it's this and that." So that was really just kind of a joke. And then when I was sending demos out for Room 5, I had recorded what I wanted to be Cliffhanger Part 2, but it ended up becoming, I guess it was that. But I sent all these demos, and I sent it on a DAT tape. This is before CDs were even that big. And, or maybe it was CD. But at the end of it, I did all that knocking again. I just thought, if the guys in the band hear this, they're going to crack up, So it was a joke I sent to the guys in the band. And it was probably Carl again. He goes, "Oh, my God, we got to do that again." And I said, no, I'm absolutely joking. That's for your benefit. I'm throwing doorbells in and all this stuff. And so we ended up doing that again. Anyway, back to Digital Ghost. The joke with that song, with Honor, was, when we were discussing it, I remember talking to Brent, and, we always have like pre-album discussions. And I said, "Hey, one thing I don't want to do is that really fast open string thing we do, where you play 2 or 3 notes and you have an open string." Because we did it on Chased, and we did it on this song, and we did it in War for Sale. And, I think we've done that to death. Why don't we not do that? And so that was kind of one of the things. We were going to not do that. We were going to not try to sound like anything that any other prog band had done. And I think somebody compared us to Dream Theater on a song. And I said, let's make sure we don't sound like that. We don't need to do that. We don't need to sound like anybody. And then, and this is a long story for one song, but you'll never hear the song the same way again. So I finally got in touch with Chris Ingalls again, and I was so happy, because I missed him, because he was like one of my closest friends when I joined the band. And he was at a library, and, he didn't have any musical gear anymore, and, it's a long story. But I said, "Chris, please just write with me one song. It can be on your terms. You can come over whenever you want. You can do as little as you want, as much as you want, just anything. I just really would love to write with you. You're missing from that Shadow Gallery sound that, that first album is so brilliant from, and the second album too." And he's sending me an email. He goes, "Well, I'm at the library right now, but I guess if we had to write a song right now, I would pick," and he just instantly sent me 4 notes. He goes, "How about A sharp, G flat?" And, and he was joking. And I wrote back, I said, "Well, great. I was hoping for a little more than that, but, thanks, pal. That's a start," joking completely. And then I teach, and my next 2 or 3 students canceled, and I had a break. So I just went to my keyboard, and the first sound that came up, I hit that, and, it was some random weird choir sound. And I hit record, and I just played those 4 notes for like a minute, A sharp, G flat, and I just kept playing it. And I thought, this would be a funny joke if I send this right back to him tomorrow, going, "Here's your 4 notes, here's our new song." And then to make it funnier, I thought, I'm going to send this to Chris and to Carl and Brent too. And I did all the things I said we won't do. I did the dun, 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 dun. Like we weren't going to do that stuff anymore. We had already done it. So that was one of the on my list of do not do things. So I intentionally did everything I said we're not going to do as a complete joke. You know what I mean? Just to go, hey guys, how about this? So they'd be like, oh, they would laugh their butts off going, great, you managed to cover all the let's not do it lists that you initiated. So I did that, and I just played it over those 4 notes that Chris wrote. And, Carl heard it, and he called me. He goes, this is fantastic. This is going to be on the next record. I said, no, Carl, once again, absolute joke. So there's some little history here of me just, trying to be a wise ass and doing the things I say let's not do, or just to make them laugh, and then somebody kind of gets insistent that we put it on. So the whole song With Honor, at least the first 3 minutes, was an absolute joke of saying, let's not do these things anymore. And then there we go again. There it is. So,
that's a great story.
Yeah.
So how did you get hooked up with Brian? And also I was curious how some of the guest musicians became a part of the recording.
Brian, yeah, there's so many stories that are long stories. I'm just trying to condense it in my head right now. I met Brian when I was building my new studio. I was building a studio from ground up, and we had the Shadow Gallery studio, but yeah, that was small, modest. It was like basically a gigantic 2-car garage converted into a studio on someone else's property. So I was building a studio, and my general contractor played me this song. He goes, you got to hear this guy sing, and I want to get him in my band. And he played it for me. I thought, oh, cool. I love the reverb. I love the guy's voice. And he said, yeah, but he's not really the guitar player. This is just a demo he's writing for our singer, and the singer's really good. So this is just my general contractor, who I didn't really know that well, but he happened to be a big progressive rock fan, and he was in the band himself. So, I think it was exciting for him and fun for us to talk about not only, what kind of drywall we're putting up, but, about our favorite Rush. Well, so that was that. And then when Mike died, it was very sudden. We knew Mike had some health issues, but it was really unexpected, and he was very young. I absolutely knew, and I know this is so cliche to say, but I knew that he wanted us to make that record because he loved it. So there was really no question for more than a blink of an eye. At first we said we can't do this record without him, but then I knew there was no way we could skip over it and not do it because he loved it. He just loved it. So we went for a search for singers, and honestly, there was a lot of disagreements on what we should do, and I thought, well, this is the time. All 4 of us have always sang. We always have sang lead and backing vocals. Why don't we just sing the record? But some other people in the band thought, well, we need that lead singer, that front man. So we kind of went to a compromise and said, we'll get a lead singer, but all of us will also do a lot of lead vocals. And that's one of the things I like a lot about Digital Ghost is, there is a lead vocalist, but it's 4 lead vocalists at all different times. And that's certainly not a new idea, but for us, it was an idea I wanted to push us in. And so the other end was like, well, who do we get then? Who's going to be that extra singer? And someone in the band suggested, hey, why don't we get Jeff Tate from Queensryche? And, my response was, this would be a huge step down for Jeff Tate to join our band. And I don't see that happening. I don't think it's a realistic expectation. And then I was reminded at that moment of this singer that my general contractor played me like a year and a half earlier. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. I heard this guy who sounds like Jeff Tate. Let me see if I can find him. So I searched like crazy for this guy, and called everybody I knew who might have met him. And I finally tracked him down to Texas, but then it looked like he may have died too. And I was like, I pretty much gave up on it. But I put together a little report and sent an email to the guys in the band going, hey, sorry, that guy that we were talking about, it's just going to be impossible to find him. I was ready to do those like online searches for $100 to locate the guy. But I sent all the information to the guys in the band and an email. And then I got a call a minute after I sent the email, and it was Carl, because I found a picture of him. And he said, Gary, that email you sent me, that guy in the photo, that's the guy? I said, yeah, but we're never going to find him. He said, I just had lunch with him. He goes, he works in my building. I just saw him in the cafeteria. So as it turns out, he never moved. He got a job and worked the same building that Carl worked in. And while they didn't know each other, they saw each other every day. So it kind of became obvious just in the, sense of fate that Brian would have to sing that album. And he did, how do you say, nah, let's look for somebody else at that point? There's just too much providence there. So that's how Brian got involved. And, we always like having guest singers, and eventually being in the business a long time, you make a lot of friends, and it's just fun to get them involved.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, Clay Barton and Ralph Sheepers, especially kind of getting to do a little bit of lead vocal work. I was mentioning on the podcast, it's cool to hear, Ralph Sheepers is known as a power metal vocalist from Gamma Ray and Primal Fear, and to hear him kind of do a prog record was kind of fun. And Clay is just a great singer. It was cool to hear him as well.
Yeah, Clay I knew through the manager of his band was a guitar student and good friend of mine, and then she ended up going on helping set up the tour and becoming our merch girl and having a long history with Shadow Gallery after that, even though we don't have a long discography or much to talk about. But Jill Hughes, she helped facilitate that, and Clay only lived an hour or two from here. Ralph I didn't know. I knew of him. Carl was a big fan of, Halloween and Gamma Ray and all those bands. So that may have been, Carl might have come to me and said, hey, see if you can get Ralph Sheepers. And, it wasn't, I know enough people who know enough people that, I could just call my friend Arian, who's in a band called Arion, and say, hey, can you give me the numbers of these people or whatever? And, he confidentially does that. And so, Ralph, it was cool to get Ralph involved too. And, I think we had a couple other people scheduled to sing. It was just nice to have different voices, mixed in, since we already had all of ours, and it was becoming this more of a gallery of singers.
It was funny. It's funny to me that you said that you called Aaron. I feel like he's the guy you'd call if you needed somebody's number, because he's had so many different vocalists on Arion albums through the years. It's like, yeah, that's who I'd call.
Oh, well, yeah, and I don't talk to him as much these days, but back then, 10, 15 years ago, he and I we were very close friends, and talked or emailed on average, probably every day, and I was doing the Star One records with him, and so I was involved, and, I believe, I don't remember doing this, but somebody, I think he told me after the fact, hey, thanks again for James LaBrie, and I was working with James LaBrie on his solo albums. And I know Arian was looking for some different people, and I gave him James's number, and that's how he ended up on the Human Equation. So we had both been helping each other out with ideas and singers, but yeah, you're right. He's the guy to call. He's his phone book, if such a thing did exist, it would be certainly stuffed.
Right, and if you needed power metal guys, you call Tobias from Advantasia. Right.
Yeah. No shortage of.
Yeah, so it's time to tour. How did the first Shadow Gallery live shows become a reality?
Well, it was during our release party. To be honest, and this is something I don't mention often, but when we did get towards the end of the album before that, and I was saying what we were talking about doing maybe an acoustic show or going down to Prague Power and just doing a simple thing. Mike was having some health issues, and we knew that putting him out on the road could be a really terrible idea, because we didn't know the extent of what he could handle or what he couldn't, nor we wanted to talk about it or mention it in the press, so we never ever did. So, God rest his soul, is a big part of the band, and he provided so much of the magic that made us who we are. Once we had Brian, we had somebody who was maybe a little more capable of saying, okay, I can do this. And so immediately I was like, all right, let's start looking at options. And it started immediately. It was at our release party. We got an offer from somebody from Rosfest, who puts on a festival. And we said, yeah, we're going to seriously consider this. And then almost immediately the next day, somebody who was doing a much bigger show offered us a headlining position for much more money, and it was a much different situation. And so we had to reluctantly go back to George, or to the guy from Rosfest, and we didn't have a contract. We just said, yeah, we're interested. And we had to say, hey, we looks like we can't do this. And then, sadly and ironically, the other gig that we took, which was supposed to be this big, it was called the Triton Cruise Fest, one of those festivals with 30 bands on it. Something happened with the health of the promoter, her son, and things just got crazy. And after we started rehearsing and like crazy for that, starting to do that show, she had to cancel the entire event. So at that point, I was like, okay, look, we've been rehearsing for a tour. I'm not going to have this happen again. I joined this band how many decades ago to tour. We are getting out there. So we got offered prog rock. What the hell was it called? The one in Europe, a festival there. And once you're going
Prog Power Europe.
Prog Power Europe. And they actually had asked us, I think, 8 times. Renee Jensen, I know for at least 10, 12 years. So he had asked us over and over again, as most of these promoters have. God rest their patience. You know what I mean? It's just like, bless their patience, because they would ask us, and I'd have to say, well, we can't. But they'd ask us again. Send him with Gleb Harbiston at Prog Power in Atlanta. He would very, very politely ask us year after year, and I'd have to say, can't do it this year. And thank God they would ask us again, because eventually I was able to tell everybody yes. So once we were going to go over there to do that show, it was like, look, we're flying over. It's a big expense. While we're there, we got to do more shows. And so I put together a tour. And, boy, it was fantastic to do it. And then, obviously do it again. And, but, yeah, it was a long time waiting, but it was really a lot of fun.
Well, Justin, I promised Justin I would ask you about this. He was at the show at Barley Creek in Tannersville, and he wanted me to ask you. He had just gotten married 3 days before, and he hadn't gone on his honeymoon yet, and him and his wife got in the car and drove from Long Island to Tannersville to see the very first Shadow Gallery show. And I joked to him that Tannersville is now the honeymoon capital of the USA, thanks to him. How did that show come about? I was oh my God, I wanted to go to this so badly, but I was actually leaving in 2 days after that to go to Prog Power in Atlanta, and I just couldn't make it work. It would have been like a 5 or 6 hour drive for me from Rochester, New York. I ended up looking at the set list and smashing my head against the wall. I said, how did I miss this? But how did this little show come about, and what was the experience like playing the very first Shadow Gallery live show?
Well, I mean, we didn't want our first show ever as a full band, especially with a new singer who just was learning our old material, and we didn't want that to be headlining a festival in Europe. It's not, they're not huge festivals. Nothing in prog rock is huge, but for us it was very big, and a very respected show. So we were like, we can't go over there and make that our first show. I mean, we'll break strings, things will fall apart. So we need to do a warm-up show or two, and we actually did 2. So our first one was unadvertised completely at a place called the Riverside, and that wasn't a crew show. It wasn't, neither was Tannersville either, but it wasn't our crew, but it was us just going through the motions and making sure we knew how we were going to act and who was going to go where. And, over years you learn stuff like stage presence and, like I didn't know if the other guys jumped around, and if we did, are we going to step on each other's feet? So we did that show, and that was quite an undertaking. And then we planned the Barley Creek show, and that was a stage I've played many, many times, and many, many times since. And it's about maybe 10 minutes from my house, so it's very close. We tossed around venue ideas. I thought that would be great. We would keep it advertised, but more on a local basis. You know what I mean? We'd try to keep it small. Of course, we don't know. I mean, it could have been 50 people, could have been 5,000, but we knew the capacity of the place was probably 300-400, and I don't know. That's probably what we ended up with. Certainly not more than that. But it was just, again, a chance to play before 2 weeks we'd go over on tour, because once you're touring for the first time, you're out there. You can't go home. That's it. You got 4 straight weeks of playing, every day or a couple times, whatever it was, a couple times a week.
How did you feel that the band gelled as a live act, being that you guys have been together for so long but hadn't actually done any live shows? Did you feel like you guys kind of just fell right into it and it was easy, or were there any growing pains? How did that go?
It was both extremely easy and extremely challenging. It made me realize things like, we shouldn't write parts that are going crazy on guitar and keyboards almost all the time, and then have vocals going all the time, because, for me, I couldn't move. I mean, there was like 5 spots in the show where I could actually stretch out and kind of go out into the crowd, or, towards the crowd, but I was tethered to it, as the main keyboard player. I was tethered to the keyboard with my right hand on the keyboard, my left hand on the guitar, and my lips 2 inches away from a vocal mic. And that was a fun challenge, and it's certainly nothing that I'm not used to. But I wish there was. I wish we had written some of those older songs differently, because they were never designed with playing live in mind. They were only designed with, this is what we want to record, let's record it.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a challenge. I felt good after the show. I felt really good. I also, in my head, I had a list of 100 things that I thought I could have done better, we could have done better. But, it was certainly a smart move to go do that before we just hopped on a plane and, there was no looking back.
Cool. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the Prague Power USA performance because, a number of people that listen to our podcast are regular attendees at the festival. Me and Justin were right there in the front for that. I was so excited. This was going to be my first time seeing a band that I loved since 1997. So it was a long time coming for me. Yeah, I was just curious what some of your thoughts were just performing in Atlanta at that festival, and maybe if you have any interesting stories, and if you don't mind mentioning having DC kind of join you on stage and what that was like as well.
Well, I think by the time we got to Atlanta, and once again, big thanks to Glenn for his resiliency in asking us once again. But once the word got out that we were starting to play and tour, then it was everybody who ever asked us in the past to do a festival was emailing me. That felt great doing that. The stress was lessened a bunch, and a different day for a different podcast, I could tell you the tales of the shows, and then just some of the disasters that have happened at some of our shows that went wrong. But that was, that's a well-oiled machine. Obviously, they have everything together there, and it's different when we did some shows in Europe, and you'd go from the Netherlands, and we've got our gear, and it's not working with their power, and we're bringing in big generators, and I don't know why our stuff's so much more difficult than anybody else's, but it seems to be the way for us. We find a way to make it more complicated than it needs to be somehow. But doing a show like that, like we did Rossfest and then Prague Power in Atlanta, was relatively very easy and felt comfortable, felt great. It was a no-brainer to have DC do that. I had been in touch with DC ever since we first worked together, and we developed a pretty good friendship and worked on some different records. So it was like, okay, well, you're here in Pittsburgh. Atlanta's not that far. Let's come down and do New World Order. I think we owe the fans that, and it was one of the bigger songs on that, one of our bigger records. And we did it again. The next year we were back in Europe, and actually was able to convince this amazingly great promoter, Harry Kazanakis, I think his name is. I said, hey, listen, I got an idea. I'm going to pitch it to you. I know it seems kind of crazy, but we would like for you to fly DC Cooper over to sing New World Order with us. And, which is kind of a crazy idea, to fly a guy from Pittsburgh to Athens to sing one half of a 7-minute song,
Right.
So it's quite an expense. You got hotel, you got, for 3 days, and airfare, and, everything that goes with it, just, again, for somebody who's singing for 3 minutes. But we thought it was worth it, and they did too. And on that second tour, when we included New World Order, we decided to include that in the set list. Instead, what I did is I contacted a different singer in every country, somebody that I had known or worked with or admired, and invited them to get up and sing with us. So we did New World Order, a couple times a week, but every single night it was a different singer. So that was a lot of fun. And then DC was, in Athens, which was one of our bigger, better, nicer shows. So that was a good place for him to be.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that's pretty much it. I appreciate you giving up some of your time. I know we went a bit longer than we discussed, but I'm glad that we kind of got to go through the entire pretty much history of the band. And as a longtime fan, I just want to say, thanks for not just today, but everything that you guys have given to us as fans. And we just hope that there'll be more shows in the future, and maybe another album, and we haven't heard the last of you guys, because it's, to me, like, you're, my personal favorite progressive metal band of all time.
Oh, well, again, truly honored. never expect to hear those words from anyone. You just kind of get in there and write your ideas and work until they sound, a little polished, and hope for the best. So thank you for being your words are the trophy to me that the work paid off. So thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Anything you want to kind of leave off with today?
No, I would just mirror that sentiment, not only to you, but to all the people who, support music and have been there and written into us and contacted us. And, it means a lot. It does. We're truly, truly grateful, just to have the opportunity to do what we do. And even if it's been on our own timetable, which is not traditional and not what your average professional full-time band does, we do what we can when we can. And, we're full of gratitude for any of that, no matter how it comes out and whatever table it turns out on. So thank you.
Well, thanks again for taking some time out and for reaching out to us. I thought maybe if I had tagged one of you guys in the post on Facebook, that maybe if somebody saw it, maybe we would be lucky enough to have somebody to reach out. But it was really just kind of a shot in the dark. And I woke up on Friday morning and I was like texting Justin and was like, "Oh my God, Gary sent us a message. He wants to help us out." And it really just means the world to us. So, thanks again. And, keep in touch, and hopefully we'll see you down the road. Yeah.
If you get a chance, shoot me your email. I lost a lot of songs a few years ago in a fire, but if I have any avant-garde with Laura Jaeger on it, I can send you stuff from, like mid-90s or 80s, probably late 80s, if you want to hear any of that.
I absolutely love that.
Cool. All right, man. Good luck to you, the show, and talk to you again.
All right. Thanks again, Gary. I appreciate it.